OK， 欢迎大家回来哈。那就延续上一场的讨论，在谈标准化的一些事情。那再提供各位大家一些数据哈。那这个数据是 Aptera，you call it Aptera or Aptera？Aptera 在9月份出来的一个报告哈。那也因为整个数位标准化，让美国在整个出版的一些百分比跟数据跟大家分享哈。那9月份今年调查的报告是80%的出版社已经出电子书了，啊，在美国，大概在3年中成长了3成。那有36%的出版社电子书的营收已经超过总营收的10%，然后其中有31%的出版社已经开始产出我们所谓的进阶电子书，啊，那进阶电子书就代表什么？把影音开始拉进来，这个成长了24%。然后全美的前4大出版社的电子书营收占全公司营收已经超过20%。啊，那这些数据看起来都很漂亮，但是大家也不用气馁，因为其中有54%的出版社的数位化还是外包给第三方来帮他们做。那60%的出版商是做 EP 同步，对不起，60%的出版商是先做 P 才做 E， 所以实际上它的成本是比较高的。然后有86%的出版商除了出电子书之外，也出纸板书，所以这是美国现在大家的一个数据哈。那接下来的话，我们大家就想说，那怎么去做一个转变，从传统的 paper 到数位？那 Leslie 这边，他是属于HarperCollins 的，那他其实一开始是在 Penguin Group， 然后到了 HarperCollins， 然后一直在整个数位化的这个做一些推展。那他也当过 Yale Publishing 的顾问，然后后来也当了 IDPF 的理事。那这边他会带我们来看他们公司 HarperCollins 是怎么做到的。那实际上 HarperCollins 是全美国前4大。那依他们的数据显示，他们的电子书的营收已经占全公司25%。All right, Leslie, would you like to make your presentation?
大家好。As Bill said, I'm going to deliver a presentation that's more practical. I hope to use fewer acronyms and be perhaps easier to understand because it's our own experience at my publishing house. And before I start, I'd like to know from the room, how many of you work with book publishers? Are you all book publishers? Can you raise your hands?
出版社的人请举个手。
Yeah, everyone? Okay, thank you. So my name is Leslie Hulse, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Digital Business Development at HarperCollins. That means that I do our deals for distribution of ebooks and audiobooks with Apple and Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Google, and consider new business models that we might sell our books in, and we work with libraries, and so it's my job is about relationships with these major vendors and new business models that meet our desire to maximize revenue for our content. I work at HarperCollins, which is one of the largest English language publishers in the world. We have divisions in 7 countries, and including a small operation in China, in Beijing. And as I make these comments, it's important to note that I'm speaking for the organization as a whole. So we are increasingly selling our books internationally and making decisions for the global catalog. So some of the challenges I'm talking about are for that globalization effort. And so they might be a little different from the challenges you're facing. HarperCollins is owned by News Corporation, which you might know by name, or you might know these other businesses that are part of the News Corporation organization. There's 20th Century Fox, which is a movie company, MySpace and social media, Sky Broadcasting, Wall Street Journal, and many more. And so we're a trade book publisher, and so these are some of the books we publish, some of which you might know because they're some sell very well internationally. Paulo Coelho, for example, is very popular in the Spanish-speaking world, but also in many languages. Freakonomics is a business book that sells around the world. We also publish dictionaries in English and also in multilingual editions, and children's books and the Bible. We're the largest Bible publisher in the world. And I wanted to pause on this slide to talk about EPUB 2 and EPUB 3 to explain that. So the book, many of these books are plain text fiction and nonfiction, and so we've been able to distribute those in EPUB 2 for many years. And so about 4 or 5 years, maybe 4 years ago, we made the decision to only distribute books in EPUB format, and many other trade publishers made that same decision and around that same time. And so EPUB became our delivery format for distributing source files to retailers. And so we weren't able, as an industry, and together with the IDPF, we weren't able to set up a situation where all of the retailers use EPUB. You may not be reading an EPUB when you're reading a book you bought from Amazon, but at least from a publisher point of view, what we're sending out the door is an EPUB. And so that enabled us to streamline our operations and stop producing 7 formats of ebooks. It was too much work to check 7 different file formats for each title. So EPUB 2 has been our standard for 4 years. It works for those books that are fiction and nonfiction that are plain text. For dictionaries, those we usually, those are more of a database kind of product. We do licensing of that. For the Bible, that didn't work well in EPUB 2 because of the file format. So that's something we can now make available with EPUB 3. And these children picture books, Goodnight Moon and Where the Wild Things Are 2 classics of children's literature in the US. And those we only made available in the last year when ebooks started to be distributed on color devices in a fixed layout. And those actually have been enhanced to include audio as well as ebook. So that gives you an idea of sort of the products and when we were able to distribute them based on what the technology could support. So HarperCollins has a 10-year history with ebooks. The first 5 years we did a lot of busy work with rights clearing and setting up early deals with partners that subsequently went away. And but the biggest step up in our business came in 2007 when Amazon launched the Kindle. And so I wanted to show you some of the key dates along the way, the milestones along the way over the last 5 years, and because I think they're important for you to know when you look at how things evolve in your market. And one of the main things, and it's shown sort of in the 2 pictures, is that starting in 2007, ebooks really became part of the mass market conversation. So Newsweek is one of the major weekly news publications, and it had the Kindle shown on the cover with Jeff Bezos. And so that brought ebooks out of a niche and into the world in a much bigger way. And then the second picture shows Oprah Winfrey, who's a talk show host, and she talked about the Kindle being one of her favorite things. So we had a point in time where ebooks really became part of the conversation. And then you had the launch of Apple and the launch of other stores and other models, and I'll talk more about sort of the milestones. But it's been a very quick ascent, and I think it's all coming to your market very soon. and you may well experience the same kind of growth that we saw in very short order. As you all know already, ebooks are available on all kinds of devices. We used to have sort of debates about, will people read on an e-ink device? Will they read on a smartphone? The fact is they read everywhere. And, Bill and I have more devices than we can count, but it boils down to people having their preferences and maybe having one device that they like to use when they're reading in bed and another device that they read when they're out in town. But it's been great to see that you can have a great reading experience across many devices, and this diversity is really exciting, and it happened because we had so many different vendors come into the business, right? There was a question: is Apple going to get into ebooks? 3 years ago we were knocking on the door of Apple, asking them to talk to us about books, and they said Steve Jobs had famously said, no one reads books anymore, and it was all he was faking us out, but that was the quote, was that no one's going to read books anymore, and meanwhile behind the doors at Apple they were developing their own solution. And so the fact now that Apple and Google have really embraced books is exciting to see. And increasingly, Google is they're now making the investment both in attention and in money and in resources to launch a significant book business. So it's going to be interesting to see how things evolve as they take on Amazon and change the dynamics of the marketplace. So you've probably all seen this before. These are some, gives you an idea of the growth of the ebook business. We've had several years of 100% growth from one year to the next, and now actually ebook sales are slowing a bit. Ebooks make up as much as 20% of overall revenue, which is interesting, especially when you look across, the large number of books that aren't made available in ebook format. So you've got some books that are selling extremely well, making up for things like the Bible that wasn't available as an ebook. So when you look across our business and see 20%, it's a remarkable number. And for any one title that's a new bestseller, that's of fiction and nonfiction, you might see as much as 50 or 60% of the sales are in ebook format. So it's certainly being embraced in the marketplace. Then I just have a few slides of research here from Nielsen, and because I think it's important to note, particularly in Asian markets. I don't know so much the situation here in Taiwan, but in China I have the impression that people perceive of digital content that they look at it on a smartphone should be free, and they're prepared to pay once they have the physical book or the physical product, whatever it is, and that's a challenge that needs to be addressed. How do you sort of change the consumer willingness to pay for content? And so this slide looks in particular at consumer willingness to pay for content on a tablet device, and you'll see in the second row down a significant willingness to pay for books, particularly in the U.S. market. The big blue circle is the U.S. market. This doesn't look at Asia, but you can see in the U.S. there is a significant part of the population that is willing to pay for book content, and though we certainly have issues of piracy in every market, some more than others, we do have consumer willingness to pay for this digital content. And then this next slide looks at smartphones and does include Asia in its survey. And so this looks at that specific point I was making about willingness to use mobile devices for transactions. And you can see in Asia Pacific, there is a willingness to pay. which is significant, and actually a higher number than I expected. So as long as they're paying for that ebook, there's a hurdle there we should be able to get over. So I have a different slide deck that I'm not showing today that goes into a great deal of detail about sort of the lessons we've learned in the last 10 years and the challenges we're facing looking forward. So, but I wanted to summarize that a little bit because I think it's helpful as you for markets such as yours, which are on the cusp of getting into the ebook business. And so things we learned along the way, and some of these learnings came from Amazon, and some of them came from different vendors, from Sony or from Apple. We learned the vital importance of having a large ebook catalog. In the early days, there was sort of this arms race with everyone announcing the hundreds of thousands of books they had in their catalog, and it was, the retailers were fighting against each other to get the most content, but they were also trying to convince consumers that the book you want is going to be available, and that actually links to the last 2 points, which were Amazon in particular was determined that every book that's on the print book bestseller list must be available as an ebook. So they send us reports every week pointing out titles that are bestsellers in print but not in ebook. And they also, all of the retailers are very eager to have books available on the same day and date as the print book. So any kind of delay in pushing out the ebook leads the consumer to believe, ebooks aren't really viable yet. It's not. You needed to have that consumer trust that everything I want to read is going to be available as an ebook, and so I'll make the investment in the device, and I'll spend the time to find the file in that ebook store. So that was an important, certainly an important thing to convince the consumers of availability, and one thing that I think it's important for you to think about, because this isn't the time to sit on your hands and not get ready. And getting ready means clearing rights, making sure you have the author's permission to distribute the book as an ebook, making sure you have established what the royalty rate is you're going to pay. During that first 5 years of that we were in this business, when it seemed not much was happening, what we were doing was clearing rights. And so that when Amazon launched on day one, we didn't have 100% of our books available, but we had 75% of our catalog was available in ebook format. And so if nothing else, so from Bill, the message is, embrace EPUB 3. From me, the message is start clearing rights, and so that you're ready to go when the technology and the retailers are ready to start selling. So other significant things we learned, and this will be obvious to all of you, probably from your own experiences, you need to be able to purchase with one click. You don't want to play with wires. You don't want to have, side loading is difficult, and that holds back adoption. You want to be able to read across multiple devices, and if you've read 10 pages on your smartphone, then you want your e-ink device to know where you are, right? That's become sort of a standard feature that the consumers expect in our market. And then as far as DRM is concerned, we, the trade publishers in the US, feel very strongly that books should have DRM applied to them. And, but we need DRM to not be an obstacle. You need to not have to sign in multiple times to get access to the content. So, significant progress has been made in the last few years around making the DRM sort of recede to the background, so that the content is secure, but you don't need to know that, right? The Apple solution is really clean, and you don't think about the DRM because it just works. And certainly there will be people that are determined to hold and touch the file, and they'll try to find it and move it around, and may even try to pirate it. But for the vast majority of people, they just want it to work. And And then the final point on the slide is that, well, I guess 2 more points. The pricing has been a real question in the evolution of the US market and how ebooks are priced relative to print books. And we had a period where ebook prices were quite low, and that led a lot of people to move to ebooks. And we thought it was destabilizing the print book business. It was making print books so unattractive that there was this mad rush to ebooks, and there was concern that that transition was happening too quickly. We had a period where prices were a little higher and things slowed down a bit, and now again ebook prices are coming down. So I think it's important to find the right balance. There's a general acceptance that, you know, that ebook should be less expensive because you don't have this physical thing that sits on your shelf, but you need to figure out the right price point that meets the consumer demand, but doesn't cut into your print book sales too quickly. Because we think as publishers we all need some time to take on board these changes. We have to, you know, the rest of my presentation is talking about our operations and how those need to be transitioned, and you can't change so quickly, right? It takes time to change staffing and processes, and and price is sort of the thing we have at our disposal to temper down the market so that this transition doesn't happen too quickly. Okay, so the second half of the presentation is really about managing this transformation, and the very specific things that we did at HarperCollins to over the last few years. So there are four areas. First is how we structured the ebook business. It had 2 sort of distinct phases. Second has been more recent, about updating the job responsibilities of employees, and we're just now doing this. This isn't, we didn't do this early on. Third is that we're upgrading our core systems to support a new kind of publishing process and new kinds of distribution. Actually, that's the fourth. And the third is updating our systems for sort of global views into the content and data, because again, we are trying to, you know, we have divisions in different markets, and so Harper UK needs to have visibility into what we're doing in the US. So there's need to globalize our systems. So first, in terms of structure, so for the first 10 years, we took an incubator style approach to our business, and in using the words of sort of business school people, business school professors, you'd call this an ambidextrous organizational structure. And right, ambidextrous means you can write equally well with both hands. This is a structure that tries to do equally well with 2 sides of a structure. And so in this structure, we had a digital publishing unit that was quite small. So this picture doesn't do it justice. It was a tiny little group that had a digital publisher, an editor, production, marketing, and sales. It had all the typical things you have in a publishing house, but there was sort of one of each person, one of each type. And that group was responsible for all ebook distribution and publishing. And then on the other side, you have the great big organization that's responsible for print. So there's actually a typo here in the box on the right. It's not a digital publisher, it's a print book publisher. Right, so you have the larger organization doing what they've always done and pushing out print books, and then you have the small group on the side that does digital publishing, and they both report up to corporate. And so this was important for us because we needed to be consistent in how we set up ebooks, right? The royalty rate, there's only one royalty rate. There's only one on sale date. There's only one approach to the on sale date, which is that the book is available the same day as print. There's only one approach to pricing, right? So we were able to make a strategic decision about the catalog as a whole, and not get bogged down in any individual editor having an opinion about when the book would be available or how we would price it. And so this was, I think, very good for setting up a catalog that, in this way we were able to do rights clearing for thousands of titles. And because you had one person that just focused on clearing rights, that was their expertise, they understood the language of the contract, that's what they did. And you needed sort of experts in that area. It wasn't so good because you had sort of made up systems, right? The managing editor for ebooks just sort of built a system that worked for her, and it wasn't productionized. It wasn't something you could, that you wanted to do for the long term, but it made sense for the short term to support the business. So this is what we did for the first 10 years until last year. So then, well, I guess I'll make one more point. So during this period, the people on the print book side, they didn't care about ebooks, right? They didn't want to know about ebooks. They didn't want to think about how those were going to be published, right? It was many years before they all had Kindles and before they were all reading on iPads and iPhones. And I think if we'd tried to force them to change to digital sooner, they would have resisted, and they wouldn't have done what we were asking them to do. Some of them would, but many of them wouldn't. That may be because we're in trade publishing, where the editors have more power. They're the ones with the relationships with the famous authors, so they have the power to say no. So that may be different in some other areas of publishing. But so there was a necessity for taking this approach because we couldn't force the change on the other side too quickly. So then in phase 2, which is now, we're integrating the whole ebook production process within the larger organization. And so what this picture is trying to show is that this is your big normal publishing process, and the outputs at the bottom are ebooks or audiobooks or print books, and it doesn't matter. The editor is much more involved in the publishing process, much more involved in the marketing of the ebook, and to some extent with pricing and other things. And this has been embraced at this point because everyone understands what ebooks are. They think that this is the future. They want to make the change. And also, as in terms of incentive, the revenue is going back to the editor and to his business unit, right? So now that he's actually receiving revenue for that, for those ebook sales, he has an incentive to want to support it. And this is also good because the editors now have a better understanding about enhanced ebooks and sort of new forms of books that we can publish. And so in conversations with authors, they can come up with new ideas. And maybe they do the ebook first, or maybe they do an ebook short that never comes out as a print book. So then second, in talking about job descriptions, so again, we didn't make this change for the first 10 years. We're making this change now. And every week, there's a new announcement of a department being restructured and new people being assigned to new roles. And we're seeing it a lot in the sales department, where we used to have a really large sales force that physically went out and made sales calls and got people to buy X number of copies of a book, and they don't need to do that as much anymore. And so the sales function is being transformed to be more of a digital marketing focus. And they still want to manage the relationship with Amazon and with the big retailers. So they want to have the relationship, but it's not about selling in a certain number of titles. It's about merchandising and sort of getting our books featured. So, but this is happening in all areas, right? It's happening in sales, it's happening in marketing, it's happening in editorial. And as I mentioned in editorial, it's about new kinds of thinking about new kinds of products that we can create. And in terms of marketing, it's about different kinds of relationships and more sort of measurable activities that we can prove lead to ebook sales. So third, we've been updating our systems for global access and distribution. So the principles here are that, and again, I'm talking about the global organization, so this may not be relevant, but we certainly had an issue with information being centrally stored and commonly searchable, right? You don't want to end up with, these separate, I wouldn't call them fiefdoms, but separate areas that each have their own information and their own data. It needs to be held in a place that everyone can access. And you need also, for another principle was that, the processes can't be so serial, right? One happening after another. You have to be able to do more things simultaneously and collaboratively. And then the third principle had to do with eliminating processes that were, there was too much sort of rechecking of things people have already done and a sort of an iteration that wasn't efficient. So to give one example that I've been involved with in particular is we now sell our ebooks globally through Amazon and Kobo, and they're selling in many markets around the world. And we want to set prices in those different markets. And so for a book that we publish in the US market, we need to know what's the right price for this book in the UK, for example. And that expertise comes from our UK organization. We don't know the right price for the UK. So there's this crazy process now of sending back and forth files on a weekly basis of, here are the books we want to price, what do you think is the right price, sending it in, getting it into systems, getting it into metadata, and it's not going to work well because there are too many points of failure. And so we're working on replacing that with a single system that everyone can tap into. They can update their prices, and they have a deadline. By Thursday at noon, you need to update your price, but it all just then flows in and through the rest of the systems effortlessly, right? So that's the kind of thing we know we need to enable global distribution. And to that point, we made a press release last week at Frankfurt Book Fair talking about HarperCollins launching a new global publishing system. We partnered with a company called PubTech, which specializes in this area. And so it's a global publishing system which enables HarperCollins to unify editorial, marketing, and business data around the world. So this replaces individual managing editorial systems that were tracking, all kinds of information from the point of that we had a signed contract where we knew the royalty rate and the advance that was being paid to the author and all the other information in the publishing process. This new system will, across HarperCollins globally, take everything from the point of contract through to the point of final manuscript and enable everyone to tap into one system. So it's a very exciting development. It's taking years to implement. There's a long sort of several phases of implementation, and it's been a huge effort for the company, but they feel very strongly that this is something crucial to functioning as a global publisher. So I think there are other major publishers that are less centralized, but HarperCollins is taking a more centralized approach and looking to work seamlessly across borders, and so this kind of system enables that. Okay, so the next is that we are working on optimizing our processes, and this starts with a process of mapping out what your processes are. So this picture shows a typical publishing process. I assume it's somewhat similar to what you have in your own operations, but what you have starting at the left on the blue line is you have a manuscript coming in, going through an editorial review, going through copy editing, and then coming down into the process of becoming a print book. And you have typesetting and you have proofreading coming across. You can see the gray circles when it iterates, when it gets turned around for more review. You can see in the red where after the first pass, we're taking out a version of it to create as a print-bound galley that we send to reviewers and to retailers. And then coming on, you have more reviews, and then coming out on the right here on the green line, you have a print book, and going up in orange, you have an ebook. So it's probably immediately obvious to you some problems with that process with regard to ebooks. For one thing, this leads you to creating an ebook in 2 weeks at the end of the cycle. And that can be difficult if you haven't optimized if you've got too many titles that come all at once, or if something gets delayed, there's a real risk that you miss the on sale date, right? Because the goal is that when you get to that green arrow point at the right and when you get to that orange arrow point at the right, they need to be the same day. And so there's a risk there that that ebook doesn't get produced fast enough. And there's another issue that jumps out at me is back on the blue line. It says tag manuscript, right? So at that point, we're doing tagging of we're helping to understand the structure of the book. This is the table of contents, this is the chapter, this is a chapter heading, this is a section heading. That's happening back there in the blue, way at the beginning of the process. It's getting lost, and by the time we're outputting as an ebook, we've lost that information. So those are two big problems. And then another is this incorporating enhanced content in the orange on the right. So if we're creating some kind of enhanced product, that's also getting jammed in 2 weeks. But this is what we've done for 10 years. This worked. It got us to 20% of our sales. It was sufficient it was the right way to do things for a long time. And it's only now that ebook sales are so significant and the company wants to make a larger investment, and we're only now doing this transformation and rewriting the job descriptions, all of that, new processes. So I would suggest, I had questions about this yesterday in a different forum. I would suggest that this is entirely appropriate way to start. And there are lots of ebook conversion houses that are set up to help you with this, taking this approach, where you wait all the way until you have an edited proof, a print-ready file, and then you make your ebook conversion. That might be a perfectly good way to start, and so that you're not tackling too much all at once. But for us, 10 years later, now's the time to make changes to this. So the first step to that is mapping out your processes and understanding, who does what along the way, and then actually becoming quite clinical at measuring, how much time is spent on each of those steps, and where are we losing, where are things getting bottlenecked, where are we doing too many rounds of checking that are making the book come out late. And so to give two examples, here in the orange, when we started producing enhanced ebooks, which means adding audio, adding video to the final product way at the end there, we were asking our normal production people to do that. So they're trying to do production for all of the books that they normally do, ebook production. And then on top of that, they're playing around with new tools and audio and video and things they know nothing about, but are eager to learn. And so that was completely messing up the ebook production process, because they were spending a huge amount of time producing something that was going to sell 100 copies. And so there's a problem there, right? But you don't know that until you go sort of department by department and look at throughput and look at costs. And so at the bottom here, we outline some potential measures you could use to to analyze the what's going on, you can look at time to market, and you can look at product quality, you can look at costs per title, and get a sense of, what's going on here. Where are the obvious things we need to change to speed throughput? So one example was enhanced ebooks. Another example is QA, right? The quality control on the ebook files. So we could be spending a huge amount of time checking every ebook, right? Reading every page, making sure that it's clean. And we decided not to do that because it just took too much time and it just slowed things down. And so we have a protocol of the amount of checking we're going to do, the number of pages we would look at, the number of mistakes that are acceptable. We have service levels, expectations with vendors. So we have a certain expectation of sort of good enough, and then we'll push the ebook out there, and we'll wait for Bill to be reading something and raise his hand and say, there are problems, there are hyphens at the end of every line, or whatever the problem is. So we're relying on consumers to give us feedback, and then we'll fix the file. And we chose to take that approach, which will frustrate Bill because he's seeing something with typos, but we won't, as soon as he complains, we do a real QA on the file and then push out a clean one, right? So we made this decision that this approach was good enough, and that this was the best way to optimize the process so we don't get things bogged down internally. We get the books out the door, and we rely upon the vast number of readers to help us to check the files. So that's the kind of decision we made, but early on we were spending a lot of time doing QA, and it was slowing things down. So I'd suggest that this process of first mapping and then measuring very clinically where you're spending your time, where you're using a lot of resources, is crucial to knowing how to optimize your process. So in our case, we knew that we had a problem with ebook production. Because of these enhanced ebooks, we could see that too much time was being spent on this special new thing, and that was hurting the other titles. So something that we've been doing is to introduce a process of sorting, and to look at the catalog as a whole, because all titles are not equal. We want them all to succeed, but certain ones need more marketing, certain ones need more editorial support. They can be grouped into separate categories, and so this is one possible way you can group, where the y-axis is the amount of marketing investment that's needed, the x-axis is the amount of editorial investment. And so you might have a literary book that we think is very important. We hope it's going to win awards, but it's a known author, so who already has a track record, right? So that might end up over here in the bottom right. And so each of your books can be sort of put into a bucket, and then we're taking the approach of saying, well, that needs a different production process, because you don't want to treat everybody the same. So to see that in visually, you've got over there on the left a whole bunch of books, and I'm sorry it's so unreadable, but you've got buried under there one big box which says really big title, right? So that's a book that is going to be a bestseller. We're 99% sure that that's going to be big. It's an author or a subject matter that we know has a big audience. Then you've got these blue boxes, which are, we don't know. Could be big, not so sure. And then you've got a lot of the gray, I think it's the medium-sized ones. And our current process is just everybody's got to go through this narrow pipe here, and you're either stopping or you're going. And So you can visually see the problem here, right? You can't fit all of that through, and you don't want to hurt the big title by spending so much time on the small ones, which is exactly what we were doing. So that leads you to taking an approach. So what we've got at the top is sort of the current process, where you've got quite a long print production process of, it takes a year to get a book in and out. And you have, and this is showing you, a long print process and a very short ebook process at the end. Once you're doing that kind of sorting, you can get to a future state in the bottom section where you have books that can be done on a much shorter timeline, and they're handled in a completely different pipeline from the ones that need more time. So to give 2 examples, or 3 examples, I guess, we now have in the romance genre some books that are, they're in the Avon Impulse imprint, and they are not, in the past we wouldn't have published these books. We don't expect them to sell so well that we would have paid in advance, and we don't want to spend a year on them. We're not going to give them the full editorial focus. But these are things that might otherwise be self-published, right? This author might otherwise go to Amazon or to Barnes & Noble or to Apple and just publish it themselves. So we want to give them a little bit of editorial support, a little bit of marketing support, and give them the branding of a big publishing house. But these are things we can do quickly. And so that gets you in this sort of top box here, where there's a shorter timeline, and we're only publishing a digital book. There's no print, and it can go through quickly. Another example is places where we're collaborating with the other parts of News Corporation, where the Wall Street Journal might already have articles that they've published in the newspaper, and we're going to pull those together into an ebook and publish this ebook only digitally. So again, that doesn't need a lot of time for editorial, right? So we're doing one of those right now with the New York Post, and from beginning to end, it'll be 2 months. We could have maybe done it in 6 weeks. So that's the kind of thing we want to handle that completely separately from the big, beautiful literary fiction that needs time to go out to reviewers and needs time to get edited. So this is something we're just introducing. A year from now I can tell you if it's a success. But it's, I think, the right approach, because there are these different kinds of content that we're creating now. And I think that's all I have. Are there any questions? Yes?
The first one is, how do you tell HarperCollins authors, publishers, and digital formats? Because most of them are not releasing this And the second question is about revenue sharing. So, because the 2 biggest digital distribution channel are Amazon and Apple. Mm-hmm. So how do you negotiate with them revenue sharing?
Okay. So I don't know if everyone heard the first question. It was about how do we convince authors to participate in the ebook business. So as I mentioned, for the first 5 years, we were working on clearing rights. And at that time, it was very difficult because authors hadn't seen ebooks. They didn't know consumers wanted them. They were scared about the content being pirated. They were scared they were going to agree to a royalty rate that was too low. So there was a lot of concern. And so it was harder back then. But as time has progressed and the authors start reading ebooks themselves and they have fans asking them to make the books available as ebooks, the job became easier and easier. And so for a long time, we had some authors that refused, and either because they were concerned about piracy or they just love paper. It's hard to argue with someone who says, I just love paper. And so even in the picture I showed at the beginning of the covers, there were some books there that aren't available in ebook form because we just can't convince them. But everything, we try to negotiate rights for every book, and the job certainly gets easier. So I think it's a combination of, in order, if you're asking how to convince them, I think it's a combination of, putting an ebook in their hand, having wide adoption across the marketplace, having them hear that the royalty rate is sort of standard, and having fan requests. When their readers are asking them to make available ebooks, that'll help get you there. I mean, Amazon was very aggressive about this, and when they found out that authors weren't agreeing to ebooks, they would fly around the country with an ebook device and put it in their hands and give them a demo, and they actually had people whose job it was to go around convincing authors. So it does take some hand-holding, but it gets easier. The second question was about royalties, or rev share. I'm trying to think the right way to say this. So we have ebook distribution deals with Amazon and Apple and Google and all the major players, and for the most part, the approach is pretty standard. We work on an agency model, and I think everyone in the world knows the agency model commission that Apple pays when you put an application in the App Store or when you put a book in the bookstore. They pay 30% on everything. And so that sort of is a de facto standard for for publishers that work on the agency model. But if you're not working on the agency model and you're working on the reseller model, then there's more variability in the terms. And so I'm not in a position to talk about what our terms are or how we negotiate them. In our market for sales in the US, we have a law that requires us to give sort of the same terms to two vendors that are working in the same model. So we have in our market sort of one approach, but I don't think that applies in your market. So I wouldn't assume that what happened with us will happen for you. So I'm sorry, I can't quite answer the question. Are there any other questions? Does everyone understand sort of the agency model versus the reseller model? Should I talk about that? You understand? Okay. All right. Yes.
What do you think about the DRM perspective?
Okay. So as I mentioned in the beginning, when I talked about the lessons, so HarperCollins and other trade publishers are making books available with security, and to us it's important that we want DRM applied to our ebooks, but we know that it needs to not be an obstacle. It needs to be in the background, and so that if a consumer is fighting to find the file, then it's not going to work. So I think we made an announcement yesterday of a small test where we're making some books available without DRM. It's in the romance genre, where in romance there's a little bit more experimentation around DRM free, but 98% of our catalog has DRM. And so you have certain publishers in the US, O'Reilly is one, but there are several sort of niche publishers that feel very strongly that everything should be available DRM free. And they've taken that approach for many years, and O'Reilly is a publisher of computer books, and they've actually taken the approach of when you make a purchase, you get the book in 4 file formats, and it's DRM free, and you can do with it what you want. And so they make available DAISY format and Adobe and EPUB, PDF, EPUB, and something else, Mobi. And so their approach is very different from that of the large trade publishers. They feel very strongly that that's the right approach. But they are working in a niche in computer technology books that is more accepting of this approach. And also they don't have authors that are demanding a royalty, right? It's easier to convince the author of some book about code to go DRM free, and harder to convince Michael Crichton or Michael Crichton's estate that we're going to make this book available DRM free, and who knows what's going to happen to your royalties, right? That's a different, we can't make, it's harder for us to make that case to authors. Anyone else? Yes.
Hi, my name is Evelyn. I have a question which breaks down to two smaller questions regarding to the QA process within the HarperCollins. First one, that from my own interpretation, that you have limited protocol of checking points of your ebooks, and you rely on the consumer's feedback to improve on them. And does it ever pose a worry about that the quality control, where at the end product is not 100% perfect or as beautiful as most editors would demand, that you might jeopardize in a way, or a small percentage of it, the general impression, the branding impression of HarperCollins? Okay, and
should I answer that one first?
That's the first question. Yes,
I'll answer that one first, because I can't hold two questions in my head. So I think, when I was talking about this slide and talking about the QA process, it's true, we're doing this work very quickly at the end, so we don't have much time to work with. And so the main thing we're doing to help this process is, when we're sending the book out to a conversion house, to a conversion vendor, we have certain service levels that are required. Right, they need to send back to us a file that is 99% or 98.5% accurate. So to some extent, it's their responsibility to do that QA. And so when it comes back in, so what I'm saying is, we're not doing the additional checking when it comes back to us. There have been some huge disasters with this approach. I think the author of Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling, just published a new book, and for the first few hours, the file that was available had problems. We had our own mistakes with a big book a couple of months ago. So I think it certainly can cause problems.